and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9. I'm Paul Kretschmer. On today's broadcast, we'll be speaking with a pastor who has found a way to dampen the anxiety in his life through Jesus Christ and shares that with others in a new book. Well, I have on the line to begin our recording here Pastor Jeff Peabody. He has written a book entitled Perfectly Suited: The Armor of God for the Anxious Mind. Anxiety is something that many people face, don't they, Pastor?
They sure do. It seems pretty rampant these days.
Why is it greater now than before? I ask because it seems like every generation looks at the stuff that's going on around them and thinks the final days must be here. It couldn't get any worse than that, and then it does.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there are a lot of factors. I think sometimes they're personal. I know from my own story, it was rooted in just my own my life and history. But I think also there's cultural stuff that compounds it with. I don't think social media has done much to help the situation, especially with younger generations. I know that seems like from research that's contributing a lot to anxiety. It just seems to be sort of the spirit of the age these days, that anxiety is just prevalent experience for a lot of people.
I know in my own life, I've often been what I would nowadays consider overly concerned about some aspects of life that other people seemingly take for granted. And I think maybe it's something in the way I'm put together. Would that make sense to you?
Oh, totally. For me, my own experience, I was just sort of, I guess for most of my adulthood, really kind of oblivious to my own feelings. I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on inside. And you could ask me at any given time how I was doing, and I probably couldn't really say much about it. But our bodies and our brains are feeling things even when we're not aware of what's going on, and eventually they get our attention one way or another. And for me, I kind of hit a mental and emotional wall where all of a sudden I tell people it felt like my brain broke, where all of a sudden I was just being flooded by all these unwanted, intrusive thoughts, and I couldn't stop my brain. It was just spinning out of control, and I was really scared and bewildered. And I went on a walk with a friend of mine who happens to be a therapist, and as we were talking, I'm just pouring out my heart, and I'm just crying, which was also very uncharacteristic of me. And I got to the end of my little outpouring, and I said, and just kind of bewilderment, I said, I am not an anxious person. And he looked at me and he laughed, which was the last reaction I was expecting in that moment. Didn't sound very comforting, but it really pulled me up short to realize that he was seeing something in me that I just wasn't seeing in myself. And that kind of started me on a journey of unpacking and realizing, there was a whole lot of anxiety just below the surface for me. And so, kind of a long answer to what you were saying, but I think there were things that were making me anxious that other people took for granted that I think I just was ignoring for a long time.
I understand that you've had an interesting career in that you worked in one field and then moved into another field. Did you notice any significant difference in how you felt or how you function between those two different pathways that you've gone through, or was the response to life for you very much the same either way?
That is a really good question. I definitely think for me, moving into the pastorate brought different kinds of anxieties than I was experiencing in advertising. There were a lot of work pressures in the advertising world for me, but I had a lot of baggage around just the whole idea of becoming a pastor that I think compounded my anxieties. And then, it tends to be the sort of role where you're usually in a helper sort of position, where you're used to being the one who has the answers or is caring for other people, and so you are. I mean, I didn't really feel like I was trying to put on a show, but there's this expectation, I think, that goes with the role of having it all together and having the answers and not really allowing yourself to feel some things sometimes. And so I think, yeah, there was probably some additional layers that built up for me by moving into this job.
You have written and spoken about your book as being one about protection and vulnerability, about defensiveness and pain and avoidance. Could you break that down a little for me?
Sure. Yeah, I think most of my life I've been a performer, kind of the compliant overachiever type of kid when I was growing up. I grew up in a Christian home, and I think it's really hard for people who come to Christ as a child to separate out the messages of the gospel and obedience, and so it can feel like you learn all these messages about what a good Christian looks like as a kid, where the language is so much around doing the right thing. And so I always was that kid who was trying really hard to do the right thing, and sometimes that leads into just building a life based on my own performance. And so what I thought was really a life of faith was a lot of times really just faith in myself, and knowing that I could do a pretty good job of complying with what was asked of me. And so I think when I reached a point where my brain was operating outside of my control and I couldn't do anything about it, it was kind of the first time when I really got to a point where I was like, oh, this is what grace is for. Grace is for the things that we can't fix ourselves, that are too much for us. And so it really made me see that so much of the time I was really relying on my own goodness as my protection, my shield. That was what was keeping me safe, was that I was pretty confident that I could earn God's favor, even though I would never have said that. That's how I was operating. And so to begin to go, oh, you know what? I've got to let go of some of this armor that I've put on for myself, to be able to set that down aside so I can realize what God has given us in terms of protection through what Jesus has done for us.
That sounds a little bit like what happened when David went forth to the king, and the king tried to stack all sorts of armor on David, and David said, I can't function like this.
Yes, exactly.
In terms of growth, do we see our own growth in radically different terms than the way the Lord sees it or expects from us?
Yeah, I think I always had the assumption that as I grew in my Christian walk, that it was almost like the cross was there for getting things started, and the more mature I was in faith, the less and less I would need the cross, because I wouldn't be sinning as much, and so therefore I would be kind of growing away from it. And I think God sees it more the opposite, that we, Paul says we grow in grace. We don't grow out of it. And I think the longer we walk with Him and the closer our relationship becomes with Him, the more we realize our need for the cross.
That concludes the first of two broadcasts with Jeff Peabody, Perfectly Suited, The Armor of God for the Anxious Mind, his book, which we're talking about today and tomorrow. For further information, call us at 860-346-1049 or visit office at WIHSradio.org for email. I'm Paul Kretschmer for the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9 WIHS.